Frank, thanks for coming on to the podcast. How you doing
Absolutely.
today?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Good, good.
Weather's nice out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I like this time of year because
I liked
close
yesterday
to-
better because it was warmer.
Yeah, it was
and
a little
today
warmer.
it was like, where'd this come from?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that crazy March come in like a lion thing.
absolutely. Yeah. So for people who don't know you or who you are, can you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I am the Director of Counseling, Career Development, and Services for Students with Disabilities here at Trident Technical College. I have a long, crazy path that gets me here, but I wouldn't change a thing. And I'll say that, many years ago, I was a student, and then somehow I ended up teaching, and then somehow I ended up teaching the Vice President of Student Services, and then somehow I ended up in counseling, but love all of it. So I've been here a while, and one of the things I've told Dr. Thornley, one of the reasons I'm so successful working with students is that I often point to the chair in front of me. I said, I sat in a chair like that once. I know what it's like. It's scary. It's what do I do next? Or I don't know what to do next. Or have I messed it all up and I can't undo it now? Or am I never going to get somewhere? And it's nice to have somebody there to say, yeah, we'll figure this out. Come on, let's go. And I was fortunate enough to have that as part of my experience, and this is kind of payback. So here I am, and I do what I can for everybody.
That's great. What kind of drew you to teaching?
Nothing. And I had no intention of being a teacher. And if anybody had told me, hey, you thinking about teaching? I'd be like, get out of my face, man. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But it just so happened that I ended up taking a photography course, and then turns out that one of the instructors of the photography course was somebody I went to high school with. And so then that started talking. And then the next thing you know, it was like, hey, you want a job here? Yeah, why not? That seemed like fun. At the time, I was trying to complete my bachelor's, and I was thinking that I was going to head towards law school. I had a law enforcement background, and I was like, okay, well, that's probably where I'm going. So I had no intention of thinking that I would be an instructor.
Yeah.
But turns out that was kind of fun, and I liked doing that. And then as it turned out, we got a new vice president of student services, and we connected on a good level as talking, and she found out that I was going for counseling, and then she said, oh, I have a spot for you. Oh, okay. And I still teach. It's not the same. Teaching has changed over the past, I'll say 30 years, and some of it's good, some of it's bad.
How so? How has teaching changed?
So we use COVID as a big excuse, and we went online for COVID, but we never really came back. We were heading down that road anyway, though, and so a lot of education and higher education, for that matter, is online. It can be valuable, but at the same time, it's distant, right? There's this transactional distance, and now, for a majority of online classes, you log in and there's an instructor and there are other students in the class. We all don't meet at the same time. Right? At least here at Tech, the vast majority of the classes are designed to say, all right, log in, take a look at the calendar, watch these lectures, complete these things. We're all here, we're all working, but we're all independent at the same time. So there's no accountability, there's no connectivity to it. I can learn, but at the same time, it's not like I feel like I'm a part of anything. And I think that's the big change, is that there was at least some sense of, well, we're all in this together, and we all showed up together. And maybe I had a good day, or maybe somebody else had a bad day, but we all experienced it together.
Yeah.
Now I'm just by myself.
Yeah. You don't get that same human interaction, and I feel like, online makes you kind of lonely in a way.
It definitely does. It isolates you.
Yeah.
And then, as much as I may be in a class with 30 other students, I'm in a class by myself.
Yeah.
And nobody can see me, and nobody knows what I'm doing, and nobody's necessarily holding me to task. And maybe I see the grades come up, and maybe I post in a discussion board every now and then, but I don't really interact. Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge for education with online, is that it can be a very powerful tool. And yet at the same time, it just creates a big mess, because all we do is just put it up there.
Yeah.
And then we lose them. And so and especially from the counseling side of it, I see this coming up through the middle schools and the high schools, and those students who are now focused on online education, they have no idea what's going on. They get lost very quick. And now, what's the hope of them being successful? Small.
Yeah. What do you think of people who are like working from home? A lot of people like swear by it. But a lot of times you, again, miss that human interaction of, you know, coming into an office and having coworkers be around and, you know, that kind of, you know, I don't know, banter that you have with your coworkers, that kind of, you know, connection you have.
And I'll say that I'm a fan of telecommuting because I think it can be beneficial, but it also depends on the type of position. There are things that you can do that sometimes, you know, if I was going to be in my office working on a project and I was basically going to be isolated anyway, well, it really wouldn't matter where I was. I could be home just as easily. And if that was more flexible and more convenient for me, I need to take advantage of that. But if I really did need interaction because it's a group project or I really, and from the counseling perspective, I will say this, we were very adverse to telecommute. We were very averse to any type of video counseling or anything like that. It's just, we are trained to say, got to have them in person. I need to see the body language. We need to make those connections. That's where the therapeutic bond takes place. And that's where progress can be made. And I still believe in that. And I know that to be true. But at the same time, it's hard to do in modern society, right? It's hard to get from point A to point B in enough time because there's so many other demands and there's so many other stressors and there's so many other obstacles in my way that it's hard to find time to be able to say, right, well, I need to go meet with somebody, right? I need to carve this out. What we found were students were very quick to pick up on the video conferences. I'll go, yeah, I can talk to you on the screen. Let's do that.
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, well, they lean into that, so we lean into that with them. It's not to say that we're not in person and that we can't encourage them to come in, but they don't want to come in.
Yeah.
And that's fine as long as we can still make a connection with them. And so, as I've told my counselors, let's focus on video, not necessarily phone. Let's see them. Let's at least get that sense. You can make some kind of eye contact, although it's usually very awkward with those things. But you know, something's better than nothing. We'll give that a try. And that seems to work a little bit. And I will say that more and more more colleges are going towards that model as well. And so that's fine. And so from the counseling perspective, yeah, we could probably do this from home just as easy as we could do it in the office. But you miss things just being at home.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be a happy medium, right? There's a lot of technology that make things a lot better, make things a lot easier. But then we just go all in on one side and then we lose everything else that came before it. And I'm like, well, that wasn't the purpose either. So there's got to be a balance of these things. And yeah, as I've maintained in my division with student services, you know, there are some departments in student services, yeah, they could probably be all telecommute, and others better not be.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those financial aid. No, they're coming to see you. You be here. Right? It's just the function of some offices and some types of jobs. Some lend themselves to it, some don't. If they do, lean into it, right? That may make us more efficient. That may make us more productive. That can lead to better outcomes. That's all positive. Let's go with that. At the same time, it's just not a one size fits all.
Got you. What kind of drew you to counseling? Because it sounded like you went to school for it.
I ended up going to school for it. Had no intention of doing this.
Okay.
Turns out that just for fun, well, I liked the psychology classes.
Okay.
And then I ended up liking the instructors in the psychology classes. So I took some more because I had to fill in something. And it turns out that a couple of the psychology instructors, and this was at the College of Charleston, noticed that I was pretty good at this stuff. And so they encouraged me. And through some other, we'll say, interactions with faculty, because there's student life. And then, you know, there are some, I'm of an age, you know, late 60s, early 70s. I gravitate towards the hippies. I work with them. I'm good with this. And so some of them, yeah, they were, you know, we'll say a little bit looser. And then you end up talking with them and you realize that you really identify and they're like, well, what were you going for? No, you need to be over here. Mm-hmm. This is, and so that's kind of like that off topic career advice where they're just like, Where was you? You need to be over here with us. This is where you belong. And I don't think that they were wrong. I will say that, I was first fixated on law school, and I did apply to several law schools, and I did get accepted to them. But law school tuition, even back then,
Right.
I remember, because I was teaching photography at the time, and I remember I sat down and talked with my brother, and we were talking about how we're going to pay for this. And he's like, oh, we'll find a way. And he said, maybe you could sell some pictures. Start photography. And I'm like, do you know how many pictures I'd need to sell to pay for tuition? And he didn't skip a beat when he said, oh, just one really good one. And I was like, yeah, okay, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I kind of understand it. But at the same time, it was just one of those, and he asked me, so, well, would you be happy? I'm like, man, I don't know now. And that became the process. And so as I looked at it, I realized that, you know what? They saw something and they were right. And it did seem to fit a lot better. And I do seem more comfortable with it. And so I could flourish. So it just, at some point, it just became, why didn't I think of this sooner? Yeah. This is where I needed to be all along. And so I take that approach also with a lot of the students that I end up working with, because the question becomes, well, what is it that you want to do, right? Do what you love, because you're not going to work another day, whatever that is. If you get up in the morning and roll your eyes and say, not again, you have made a bad choice, right? But as I tell my wife, I said, I get up in the morning and I get paid to do what I would have done anyway. That's a win right there. Yeah. And so that becomes the sort of the motivation side of it underneath it. And we're all, I don't know, we're all comfortable in different spots and doing different things. And sometimes it's, okay, well, how do I make a living off of that? Because if I can do that, then I'm going to be less stressed. I'm going to be happier. I'm going to be more satisfied. I'll be more productive. It's all those things. But if you're just fighting everybody and everything every day, okay, well, you're just going to sink deeper and deeper. At some point, just let me know when you're ready. We'll talk about how to get out of that hole. Right. Yeah. And so, it was more or less, I'll joke that I was forced into it, but at the same time, it was, they pointed me in a direction, and I just recognized that they were correct.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's great to have those voices that can kind of help you along and figure out what you really want to do, especially, when you feel kind of lost or you're pursuing something and you still don't know about it yet, and so, that's always great to have that. So what do you feel like as a counselor is the biggest challenge for you right now, or in counseling right now? What do you feel like is a big challenge?
The biggest challenge we're facing, we can call it an epidemic, but there are some conditions that we're seeing over and over again that are just exponentially growing. And so anxiety, depression, post-COVID have been enormous. And they're basically criteria that go along with the loneliness and the isolation that a lot of people feel. Again, we mark COVID in the sand and go, oh, COVID, since COVID, look at all this stuff. COVID brought all this stuff. Yeah, it was happening long before. Yes. COVID just amplified everything and then gave us very specific ideas of, oh, this is really a problem, right? Okay. We still haven't solved it though, because at least by nature, when we look at societal constructs or economy, we are driven into this online world. We are driven into this technology world, and we don't know how to use it. Yeah. And we get manipulated by it very easily. And then that causes us to withdraw, and that causes us to feel overwhelmed, hopeless. Now we're worried, fearful, anxiety, all of this stuff is playing in there. And at the same time, we have those societal pressures, whether they be financial or political or whatever else. There's a lot of discourse out there. There's 1,000 reasons to think that it's about to get worse. Pressure. And from a evolutionary standpoint, we We evolved to absorb pressure in the environment, right? Stress. We feel stress. I got that. And that's all we do is we absorb it. And then metaphorically, we'll put it on our shoulders. But we actually evolved to face an enemy in the field. And so we're supposed to be taking action, but we live in a modern society. We don't take action. You just stand back. So here we come, stress, 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 goes up on my shoulders. And then, I don't want anybody to think that I can't handle it. So, stand up tall. I got this, right? Never let them see you sweat. Never show any weakness. Okay, pressure. I do this sometimes with faculty. I usually have a cup of coffee with me. So imagine me holding a cup of coffee like this. It's not a big deal. But after a while, then you all fixate on this cup of coffee. That's the gag, because the lure in is, how heavy is this cup of coffee? It's not that heavy. Maybe it's a pound. But imagine holding it like this all day, every day. It's not that heavy. It won't change physical properties, but after a little while, I'm going to lean into the side just trying to keep holding up this cup of coffee, which isn't that heavy. I just don't want anybody to think I can't handle it, but I can't handle it over. I just need to put it down. But that's a sign of weakness. I'm not supposed to be able to do that. I'm supposed to hold this thing up. I'm supposed to make everybody proud and show everybody that I've got this, and I don't. We really just need to put it down. And so ultimately, we just need to find ways to de-stress, to try to manage this. And society doesn't give us that, right? Go, go, go. Done. No, deadline. Keep going. You rest when you're dead. That type of nonsense. We just keep going, and yet still just keeps coming at us and coming at us and coming at us. And it builds, and then we shut down. Because we end up taking all this weight that we just put on the table or never should have carried it in the first place, and we internalize it. And that's what I like to say, we take it and shove it in the basement, shut the door, which isn't a bad strategy as long as the basement's really big. But it never is. And I'm doing the best I can just to hold everything in. And at some point, there's going to be a crack of the door. And then everybody comes out to play. Now I'm, whatever the situation in front of me that I'm really upset about, there's other anger, there's loss, there's grief, there's disappointment, there's frustration, there's other issues, and they are finding their way out because I never dealt with them. All I did was try to suppress them. All I did was try to internalize them. And so it leads us to feel hopeless and feel depressed, and feel lost. And then, unfortunately, we have no connectiveness, right? That's because, again, we live in this online world. Whether it's social media or in education or whatever else we're doing, we're just disconnected from everybody. So we feel alone, and then we just begin to kind of fade away, and we can't manage it. Undoing that is hard because we're not trained to do that. And we live in a society which is, I think everybody recognizes the dangers of social media, but at the same time, it's not like we shut it down. It's still there, and the stock market's still throwing money at Facebook and Meta and everybody else, and saying, I don't know about X or what used to be Twitter, but here's another $1 billion, Mr. Musk. Keep going. We say it's bad, but here we're still going with it. So which one is it? Because we don't rally around fixing the problem. We rally around, just keep it out there and hopefully it'll fix itself type of thing. And unfortunately, a lot of social media has learned over the decades, it's about stickiness. It's about keeping them in, it's keeping them going, keeping the eyeballs on the screen, right? That's how I can make the sale type of thing. But what that does is it leads us to question ourselves, right? Now I'm comparing myself to everybody else. Well, I'm not as good as blah, 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 what I'm seeing, come across the screen here. How do I become that good? And then you try, and then you realize I'm never going to be that good. Now I'm going to go down even further. And so it just opens up all these dark closets that we end up finding ourselves into. But at the same time, it's not like we're shutting any of it down. And, again, certain age, back 60s and 70s, we didn't have social media. We had Pong, right? That was the big thing. Pong, watch out, right? And then Pac-Man, like, whoa, with the graphics. Back up for a second here. I'm overloaded with that. That's nothing today, but that was
nothing about that.
That was big back in the day. Yeah. So we didn't really have to deal with those types of issues. that we have to deal with today. But you follow it along the time, and if you go back into the early '90s with the Air Jordans, there was an ad campaign that came out with Nike. I'll never forget. It was William Burroughs, who's a poet, and he was basically the voiceover within this Nike commercial. And what he had said was, technology is not meant to confuse the brain.
Mhm.
It's meant to enhance the body. And of course, they show off the Air Jordans.
Right.
Right.
But he's right, and he lifted that from one of his own poems. But he's right. Technology is not meant to confuse the brain, but that's what we do. We confuse the brain with it. We just overload ourselves with more graphics or more sound or more bells, whistles, whatever else it is, or likes, dislikes. Okay, we just keep getting that because the dopamine rush is hitting. Right, this hits my
Yeah.
reward center, and so I do confuse the mind when actually all social media really should be is just for me. Have an ability to connect, right? And I grew up in New York, and of course I had a small group of friends, but I also had cousins, and I was in the Bronx, and they were in Queens. You would think I wouldn't even know who they were, and they're like 10 miles away, because that's Queens. That's all the way over there. We're never going to get over there, right? I have to write them a letter, right? We were going to
Right.
see them.
Right.
So I stayed close to who was on the block, but if you were outside of my physical arena, I wasn't going to know you at all.
Yeah.
I'm very connected with my family, most of whom still live in New York. Some live in other areas of the country. But yeah, it's because I got social media, or I've got text messaging, or I've got FaceTime, or I've got all these other things that allow me to connect with them. And that's the use of technology, is that I can actually still maintain some relationships. But we go overboard with all of this stuff and say, oh, well, I'm not maintaining a relationship. I'm trying to establish a relationship in this arena. No, that's not really. It's not good for that. It's not working for that, right? And so we end up with we become vulnerable. We get taken advantage of. We get catfishing or whatever else happens in these areas because you can't trust anybody or trust anything. It seems.
Yeah.
And now here comes AI, and I don't even know if they're real anymore.
Right.
And so all of this is going to be very challenging. But again, the technology is valuable in that it's a tool that's going to allow us to actually strengthen connections, but we just don't use it that way. We get taken advantage of, to make sure that we buy something or that we stay in, somebody gets my information, whatever else that is. But I'm not necessarily mining healthy relationships. I'm not necessarily creating positive images in my head or positive connections or whatever else those are. And that's the danger of this. Yet technology, it's not, okay, well, just burn all technology. Let's just go backwards in time. Just can't do that. I can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
Yeah.
It's already out.
But we just don't manage it well enough. And then every now and then, they drag all the tech guys out to Congress, and Congress berates them for whatever else it is. But no change is really going to get made here because here comes the money behind it. And this is what we
Yeah.
have to do. And this is how this is going to work. And so where's the I don't know, the groundswell effort, or where's the common sense approach that says, okay, right, it's about limits. Maybe you need some screen limit time. Maybe at the same time, you just need to understand how to spot a fake, how to know what's going on. And every now and then put it down, right? It's about being in person. It's not always about just being part of a text group or a chat group or whatever else the thing is, because that doesn't always satisfy the need that we need to do. And we are social creatures. We do need social interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, and I had a two-part question, and I guess you just kind of answered it. Because I was going to ask, do you think social media, from your professional opinion, is the biggest stress factor going on with society? And is there any healthy form of social media? And I guess you just kind of answered to some degree.
So it's not the problem. And I don't know if there is the problem. There are lots of problems. And, it's like trying to hold water in your hand. Because no matter what move I make, it's going to get out somewhere. And so I'm probably never going to contain it completely. I will say that left on its own, social media is a big danger because it's too easy to put false information out there. It's too easy to get manipulated. And with the advances in AI, and I'll say that, as much as they've been talking about AI over the past couple of months, and AI has made some great advances. It ain't there yet, right? It's still, okay, that's AI,
Yeah.
right? It's still got flaws. And it's probably still going to have flaws for a while. So as concerned as I am, I'm not, well, now I can't tell anything is real. And I don't think that we're in the matrix yet. But it does mean that we aren't marching down that road, and we shouldn't be aware, and that maybe there needs to be some type of guardrails or just awareness as to, well, what does this mean? And what I've seen kind of happened in the past, but before Facebook, there was MySpace.
Mm-hmm.
Before MySpace, there was GeoCities, and before that, we had bulletin board services. So there's always been some kind of online connectivity thing, and there's always going to be people who manipulate that, or we'll say have malicious intent. Always. So it's not as if it's about to go away, and whether or not Facebook or Twitter or X or whatever else it is, or Snapchat or any of these others, whether they stay or somebody else emerges behind them and becomes whatever the next thing is, so what? There's going to be some form of this somewhere.
TikTok.
Right, TikTok, and for however long TikTok can last,
Yeah.
and then whatever comes behind that. And so it's a ubiquitous part of our lives. So where's the awareness of it, right? Where are we preaching about the dangers of it? Because we're not really doing that, and we're trying to, and what I say, we try to hold these tech companies and say, how are you going to keep 13-year-olds off your platform?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is they're not.
Right.
I can keep my 13-year-old off that platform, right? That's where it comes down to. It doesn't come down to, well, Apple needs to do more to protect my children. No, I need to do more to protect my children from Apple.
This is more parental guidance.
Well, I think just responsibility,
Mhm.
right? And so we have relinquished too much responsibility to tech. And say, oh, well, that takes care of it. Oh, that's got the safeguards, so now I can sleep at night. I can't, right? Vigilance. We have to have some vigilance.
Do you think that social media as a whole is a net positive, or is it like bad, just terrible completely?
So that in context is at the moment, it's more bad than it is good.
Yeah.
Because we're not using the tool in the proper sense, right? Because it can be a great tool. It can be a great tool for entertainment. It can be a great tool for education. It can be a great tool just to keep in touch with good friends or family or whatever else it is. That's not what it has become. And unless people revolt in some sense, right? And sometimes we pay attention to, you know what? I need to shut that off. I need to shut this off. And I need to shut that off. Until they get there, it's going to keep doing that, right? Because as long as, it's, why does somebody scream at the rain? It's because somebody's listening. Otherwise, if nobody was listening, they'd stop screaming at the rain. And it's as simple as that. But that's what ends up happening, is that there's always well, here's the new thing. And then, we have the fear of missing out. There's always been the fear of missing out, but that gets very much attached in the world of social media, because we want to be viral. We don't want to be the one that missed whatever the really cool thing was, when if you pull back the lens and say, okay, well, look at the big picture, and missing that was irrelevant. It didn't feel irrelevant at that moment. I needed to be, that was for somebody who feels isolated or feels alone, to at least be part of a group that experienced something at the same time. That's important. I needed to be there for that, right? I needed to feel like I was a collective part of something that it's at least better than nothing. But we're not taking steps to say, well, then how do we form good connections? How do we forge good relationships? How do we get meaningful relationships in our lives? We don't. We say, well, you got to work, and now you got to work really hard, and you got to keep to yourself, and you got to keep your nose clean. And you got to keep doing this. And we talk about in counseling, we talk about time management sometimes, and it's there aren't enough hours in the day. And I'll say that I talk with a lot of nursing students, and we have a fantastic nursing program, and a lot of times those students are having difficulty trying to manage, because nursing is very much like boot camp. And so they're coming into this program, and they've got families, and they've got jobs, and they've got responsibilities. And now here comes nursing, and they say, oh, by the way, you got to read 2,000 pages this week. And then we're going to give you a test, and we're not going to ask you anything about what you read. Like, man, that ain't right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the phrases that we like to use in nursing is, well, nursing requires sacrifice, right? You hear a lot of faculty say that, not just here, and every other faculty in nursing say, well, nursing takes sacrifice. If If you're not willing to sacrifice, you're not going to be successful. Okay. They don't tell you what to sacrifice, though. And so oftentimes as I work with the students, I tell them, like, you end up sacrificing yourself and none of the things in your life. That's where the mistake comes in, because there are things that we do that sometimes help us manage stress or help us keep connections. And we pitch that and we replace it with something which causes us more stress. And so we end up doing that over and over again in different things. And so we end up essentially sacrificing ourselves over and over and not focusing on, well, what's the task at hand? Can I just get the task at hand done? So we don't manage very well. But it's also hard to manage, right? Modern living is tough. It's a big fight. And, right now I'll say that, gas prices may have remained mostly steady over the past couple of months, but food prices, incrementally going up. And they sneak up on you. I'm like, damn it. I used to have enough to get all this. Now what do I do? And I'm trying to do the best I can. And I've always told everybody, I love Charleston. We've got 2 roads. And they're constantly under construction, but it's still not fixed. Mm-hmm. And if it rains a little bit or if there's a slight accident, I'm down to 1. I got nowhere to go. And how do I get from point A to point B? It's infrastructure is poorly designed, and it's not very beneficial. Stress, more stuff. Can't get it all done. I'm trying to get it all done. I'm trying to manage it all. And at some point, it just, I collapse upon myself. And we don't use the technology to our advantage. We use that sometimes as our escape to say, I can't deal with all this, so I'm just going to go hide over here in cyberspace. But that's just going to make me feel worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you feel good for a second, and then
right, you're still getting that dopamine hit, but then it's a little while. You're like, man, all right, not going to be this good, or I can't do that, or now I feel shamed, or I go down a little bit further, or I get angry, right? And as you're aware in the news, journalism, entertainment area, right? If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
We're going to go with the bad news first, and they're going to shove the bad news down your throat. And then you're going to be like,
facts. Yeah.
And it'd be like, okay, right, murder, right. I know, but we're all right. Country's on fire, right? Got it. Check, right. What's my hope? Mm-hmm. All the news tells me it's all bad.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it actually isn't news. It is. Mm-hmm. Some of it is embellished.
Right.
And that's just a product of modern news.
Yeah.
It's very easy to take that message and just accept it, right? That's where the Q people come from. Conspiracy theories are built from, it sounded outrageous. So outrageous, it has to be true. And okay, back down for just a second here. And I'll say that, again, I came from a law enforcement background. One of the things we used to say in the courthouse all the time was, common sense isn't very common. We meant that as a slap joke, but at the same time, it's also pretty true.
Yeah.
In that, you would think like, well, anybody else would see that. Why don't you? I don't know. The terms are radicalized or whatever else is. It's messaging, and that messaging just constantly is coming at us and it's getting manipulated, and we don't process it very well.
So your study is psychology, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So as a psychologist, what will you say are some things you can do to relieve stress? Like just in the common home, or people who have money, or, they may go to a retreat or something like that. But what are some things that you would recommend on for everyday person? What can they do? Some things just to relieve your stress, other than get away from their social media, if they can even manage to do that.
Getting away from social media is one thing, but ultimately, it's really just getting that weight off of our shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so the most valuable thing to do is to disconnect. Right? If I could physically just grab all this weight on my shoulders, just put this on the table for a minute, just sit back. Okay. Let me catch my breath, right? And so I liken it to, like, imagine you're carrying a box. Mm-hmm. Pick up a heavy box, like, all right, I got to move this over there. And for the first couple of steps, I got it. Mm-hmm. And then I'm struggling with it. There's a moment with, I need to put this down. I need to catch my breath. We need that. We need that every day. We need a moment. I just need to catch my breath. How we do that, it'd be different for everybody.
Right.
And I will say that the most important thing to do is to disconnect from it. And so I'll say one of the things that works well for me, my wife knows, as she goes, we're at home and she comes in the office, she notices the earbuds are in and my head's back. She likes to say I'm time traveling.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I deal with my stress sometimes. And what I do is I just listen to music randomly.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point at which I'm not listening to new music anymore. I go back to my childhood. Again, grew up in New York, and there's always a window open somewhere, and there's always music playing. There's a soundtrack to my childhood, and that music quickly takes me right back to those moments. And
A
so,
simpler time.
right, and
Yeah.
so I'll close my eyes and I'll just listen to something, and suddenly it's 1972. We're shooting hoops,
Mm-hmm.
something, right? Playing stickball in the street, whatever
Yeah.
else it is. I'm there. I'm there for a few minutes. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to try to convince you that my childhood was great. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't necessarily the best ever, but I remember the good stuff. And while I'm there, I'm not a husband. I'm not a father. I'm not a colleague. I'm not a counselor. I'm not an instructor. I'm not a neighbor. All that can be over here. I'm just going to be over here for a little while, and I'm going to breathe. I'm going to relax. I'm going to enjoy for a few moments. And when the song's over, maybe additional song, who knows? It's usually not that long. All right, back to square one. But one of the advantages of totally disconnecting is I took all that stress off my shoulder. And so while there are, we'll say, legitimate stressors, I pay the mortgage, I pay the power, do we have food? There's nonsense stress, right? Idiot that cut me off this morning, or I forgot to bring something, somebody did something
Mm-hmm.
they weren't supposed to, and I'm trying to clean up that mess, and whatever else. There's other little things that, again, we're built to absorb stress. I didn't need to, but I did.
Right.
And I didn't have a mechanism to get rid of it. So now all that's out on the table too. So that stuff does not have to come back up on my shoulders. And so that's really the value, is I'm putting it down, and I'm actually going to make the box lighter before I pick it back up. So it's a win-win. I get done. All right, get the responsibilities back on my shoulder. Let me keep going. Part of that strategy is being mindful, right? I'm just in the moment. I'm not necessarily thinking about tomorrow. I'm not thinking about the next week. I'm not thinking about the next month or whatever else that is. It's here, it's now. And so mindfulness is one of the best ways. And a lot of students I work with, meditation is definitely one of the best ways
Mm-hmm.
to help you de-stress. But meditation is tough, right?
Yeah.
That's advanced relaxation.
Too many distractions going on around.
Well, oftentimes, I'll say with some of the nursing students, like, yeah, I tried meditation, it didn't work. I'm like, yeah, it's because you never really let go. You just closed your eyes and said, I'm going to focus on breathing and counting.
Yeah.
Why is this not working? I'm like, okay, because you didn't let go of everything. That's why you still maintain that persona. You still kept everything else. I'm like, I'm trying to relax. I can't really. Yeah, just you have to actually let go. It's hard to let go. We don't want to let go because we're afraid, well, if I let go, then I'll never get control back.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to. One of the phrases we like to use in the world of photography, and what you see depends on where you stand, right? Let it go. You only need to get back what you need. You don't need to get all of it back, right? Maybe some of it we just let it go, right? And at some point, if holding on to it is causing you the problem, let it go is going to fix that. So just let it go. Just try it for a little bit. But we're all different. We have to find something that works for us, and that's the hardest part of it. Is for some people, meditation, yoga, tai chi, stretching, right? Gym, we've got the wellness center here on this campus. Some people it's about hobbies. I like to cook. Some people like to clean. Some people, I'm gonna go jogging. I'm gonna go run. Okay, what works?
Yeah.
Find what works, right? Just self-evaluate. Like, I tried this. You know what? That kind of helped. Maybe I make it different next time and gain that control. When I have that control, it's really gonna work for me. But other times it's like, I tried that and I tried it honestly and it just didn't work. So I'm gonna try something else. I bet you'll find something else.
Right.
Something will work.
Something will work.
But be in control of finding that.
You have to keep, being consistent and keep trying to find.
And the easiest thing to do is to cop out, right? And say, I don't have time, right? I can't find 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I could find 5 minutes. I could spend 10 minutes trying to convince myself I didn't have 5 minutes. So, we just have to rethink it sometimes and say, well, this is a priority or not, right? Is it something I need to do or is it not? Because if it is, I should just do it. And if it's not, well, then just all right, let that go. But I have to have that control. Now, there are times when, especially, I'll say I anticipate coming up, but there are times of the semester, times of terms, it's really stressful, right? Everything's due. Deadline. I got to get this done. I got to get that done. I feel it. When we get into emotional states, that's when sometimes we need an extra trick. Because whether it's feeling overwhelmed, or it's feeling depressed, or it's feeling anxious, or feeling lonely, or feeling sad, or whatever else it is. It's an emotional state. What we have to look at is what's actually occurring in the body at that moment, because the emotional state itself is taking place mentally, but it has a physiological effect. And a lot of times what I tell students is what you really need to imagine is a faucet, right? Kitchen faucet, bathroom faucet, water, it's running. Say you walk into the kitchen and the kitchen faucet's running and the sink is overflowing. At that moment, you realize there's two things I got to do. I got to shut off the water and I got to clean up this mess. I can't just do one. If all I did was shut off the water, there's a mess everywhere. And if all I did was start cleaning up the mess, water's still running. I'm gonna have another mess pretty soon. I'm not getting anywhere. I gotta address both of these things. And so the emotional state creates a process with a physiological response. And so oftentimes when we're angry, we feel tense, right? We feel that energy, right? Again, evolutionary side of things. We evolved to face an enemy in the field, fight or flight. That's what's actually happening. It doesn't matter what the emotional state is, and it doesn't necessarily need to be threatening, but there's energy that's forming. It's a change in heart rate, it's a change in blood pressure, it's a change in breathing, muscle tensioning, whatever else is energy. Energy is getting produced because our body thinks we're supposed to be responding to something, right? Basically, the amygdala is going, whoa, something's about to occur. Let's go. And so now we've got to deal with that. That's the mess. And so relaxing is a process of doing two things. Shutting off the faucet, which is mental process taking place in my brain, and dealing with the mess that it's already created. That's that physiological response. So oftentimes something active is what's fixing that physiological response, right? I need to take a walk and go up and down the steps. I need to stretch. I need to scream. I need to sing. I need to do something. It's got to be active. The energy has to go because the energy was created and it needs to be expressed. But if all I did was that, well, this wheel's still turning over here, so I'm going to have more of it to deal with. So I didn't have a net gain of anything because I just did that and there's more coming. So I got to shut the faucet off too. Now, shutting off the faucet is trickier because what we're talking about is a mental process. And I usually typically point to the right hemisphere of the brain because this is the emotional epicenter of the brain. It's taking place in the right hemisphere, a little bit on the frontal lobe. And so if you were ever in an emotional state and we said, oh, let's take a picture of the brain, see what's happening. This is what would be glowing. Right. This would not. Left hemisphere is more for logic reasoning. Right. And it's important to recognize that when we're looking at the states, what we're looking at is we can be both emotional and logical. We just can't be both at the same time.
Right.
I can only be one or the other. And by default, and we say this in counseling often, emotion dethrones logic. You get an emotional state, logic went out the window, right? Now I'm just angry or whatever it is. And so what I really need to do is focus on, well, how do I stop the emotional state? Because if I could force myself into a logical one, I couldn't be emotional. So how do I do that? Well, we can. It's just not as simple as saying, all right, I'm going to be logical right now. Right, no more. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Again, it's an active process. And so in the absence of anything else, what I usually recommend is math. Not weird, crazy math. Right? I'm not talking about calculus, geometry, trig, or none of that nonsense. I'm just talking about simple math. 1 + 1 is 2. 1 + 2 is 3. 1 + 3 is 4. 1 + 4 is 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a calculation, and that calculation has a result, and that result is fixed, concrete, unchanging. There is no universe where 1 + 1 is not 2. 1 + 2 is not 3. It's not abstract. There's no what if. There's no except when. There's no remember this other thing over there. Nope. It's always this. So it's logic and it's concrete. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, it's usually easy. But you do that and then suddenly this has to stop. I cannot be emotional if I'm trying to be logical. And so at some point I take all the energy from one side of the brain and move it to the other.
Do you tell it to women?
I tell that to everybody.
Well, no reason why I made it. They say that women are more right brain, men are more left brain. Do you find that to be true or no? Because you have some men can be emotional as well.
Right, I'll say so.
Because Brooks is one of them.
It's a mischaracterization to say that one gender is all on one side and one gender is all on the other. We are a mix, but we do tend to have certain tendencies, and males do have a greater tendency towards math and logic, and that's that hunter-gatherer thing. You go back to evolutionary theory and all that type of stuff. It doesn't mean that only males can do this or that type of thing. It just seems that if I had to look at gender, I'd probably lean more in this direction. But it doesn't mean that it's still not a struggle. We still have to figure out what works. And so, if it's not math, it just has to be logical, right? I'm solving, and as I said, solving a puzzle. So it's a physical puzzle. It's a crossword puzzle. It's a word puzzle. It's Wordle. It's color matching or card matching or number matching. It's a logical problem with a solution that I can get to, right? The mistake is to say, well, all right, I'm going to count backwards from 100. Counting is a sequential operation. It's not getting the wheels turning. I need the wheels to turn. A problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution. If I'm in that mindset, right, this has to stop because I'm working the problem over here. Yeah. And at some point, I will do enough of it to say, oh, right, okay. Now, where was I? Now, what am I doing, right? And how do I get out of whatever mess that I'm in, right? Because it's logic that will get me out. Emotion won't do anything.
Right.
Logic will get me out. I'm going to default to an emotional state, and it's okay. We're supposed to. That's the way we're built. All right, take control. Let's go back and say, all right, well, retrace my steps or however else you want to look at it. There's all kinds of cliches towards it, but it's actively getting into a logical mindset. Okay. Now I can move forward. Now I can solve my problem. That shuts off the faucet, right? That stops the emotional process in its tracks. And that's the good news. Now, the bad news is whatever caused the emotional state to occur still exists. I haven't resolved anything. I haven't come to terms with anything. I haven't gotten to acceptance, whatever else it is. I was upset. I was angry. Still there. Going to come back.
And that's when the psychologist comes in.
Well, that's when we start talking about, all right, well, now let's look at it because now you can do the work, right? When I'm in an angry state, I can't necessarily find a reason to say, okay, well, but I should be forgiving and blah, blah, blah. I need to come up with it. Nope, angry. It's going to stay there. I'm going to be there. And until that cool off takes place, I can't deal with it. And so all this technique does is help me say, all right, let's turn this off for just a second so we can be over here. And then we can figure out what to do for wherever we're at. Right. And oftentimes it's the control that's missing, right? There's this chaos. There's a sense of chaos. And a lot of times that sense of chaos is taking place in social media. I don't know what's coming next. I need to be ready for whatever's coming next. What's coming next? Is it bad? Oh my God, something's bad coming next. Everybody else see this coming bad? It's coming bad. Oh my God. Right. Stop. Logic says that's probably not the way this is going to be. And how do I control that? Because if I had control and I knew everything that was about to happen, I'm like, all right, well, you're not going to surprise me. What am I going to be upset about? And so we miss that portion of it. But we also give this away willingly because, the benefits oftentimes of social media, whatever the dopamine hit is I get to see my favorite singer. I get to find out about my favorite characters, or I get to see, whatever else it is, or it's one of those, oh, that looks good, or I could be like that, or this is what I really wanted. And so I get that reward. And I said, well, I want more reward. Just keep giving me a reward, please. I'm built for that, and I'm highly motivated for that. And then it slowly starts to erode everything else, and you're like, well, that's all I've got.
Yeah. I always say, I'm sorry, I mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. I always say one of the hardest things to do, I think we would be better off as a people, and that's everybody, totality, if we can control our emotions. And that's very hard, even for me, but I try every day to strive to control my emotions. I mean, that's what I think.
Well, I don't disagree because it's oftentimes when it starts to get out of control that, right, again, I'm not acting or thinking in my best interest when I'm in an emotional state. So I'm going to cause more damage to me and those I care about or whatever else that is.
Exactly.
And so, but it's truly hard to do it when... Truly. We live in an information age. Everybody wants to tell me how to think or how to act or what I should want every 10 minutes. And so they're playing on my emotions to make me do things, right? I'm being manipulated oftentimes. And that from a marketing, advertising sense, right? It's just one of those, right, it's a bar of soap. Look, get you clean, good enough. Nobody wants that ad campaign. Right? They want the one like, oh, feel that. Look, I took the soap and it gave me muscles. I gotta have that, right? That's what they want to play on that. And so, years and years and years, and I will say that, the world of advertising wasn't necessarily malicious and deceptive and evil, and I'm not going to say that it is today, but over years they figure out, wait a second, we get more sales if this happens than if that happens. I'm going to do more of that.
Yeah.
And then other people say, oh, I got to do that too. Oh, I got to keep doing that. What do we? Well, no, we all got to.
And
do
you know
that.
what they did as time progressed? They hired psychologists
Well, yeah,
to see
to learn. All right,
yeah, to
all
learn
right. What do we?
people's mental
what-
and
what-
what were they engaged in
Right.
other
What
words.
what makes them buy? What makes them click?
Exactly.
What makes them stay? And then we just keep throwing more of that, and so we end up being manipulated. And again,
Yep.
we go down the slippery slope. Now we're losing control. We feel hopeless. We feel disconnected. We feel lost. That's the mess that we're in.
Yeah.
And it's hard to. There is no one single answer to get
Right.
that out. And I think everybody has to look at their lives and try to figure out what's going on it's your life and it's your choice, and you have control whether or not you believe that.
Yeah.
And the sooner you start taking control, the sooner you can achieve whatever it is that you're looking for. That's an oversimplification of the process, but that's really what it comes down to is looking at, okay, well, what is it that we want to do? All right, something got to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Would you like to say?
I just want to change the subject
Okay.
just a little bit. Loneliness. We are living in one of the most loneliest societies that we've ever seen. Most people, there was a study done a few years ago. Most people don't have a friend that they could call if something bad happens, which, again, we're social creatures. We were talking about that earlier. What's sort of your thoughts on the loneliness epidemic, and what do you think are some ways that people can find connection in today's world?
Well, it has it gotten to epidemic proportions? Maybe. It's definitely getting there, right? It's too easy to say, well, I don't have to go out the house, right? It's too easy to say, well, I have friends online, right? We play video games together or whatever else it is. We're in this chat board or whatever else we're doing. It's too easy for me to say, well, I'm afraid of rejection going outside, so I'll stay inside and I'll stay online and then try to find my connections there. But they're not real connections oftentimes. And that's the problem, is that we're losing out on our connections. And it's not to say that you couldn't make connections online. You can, but not through normal channels. We'll just say that. It's not going to happen sort of organically like that. You got to work at it. But what we really need to do is who are our neighbors? Who are our classmates, right? Who are, with faculty, I do something we call mental health first aid. And one of the things I do when I start off is I usually pick on one of the staff members and I'll say, how you doing? Don't answer that question. And I'll come back to that, right? Hold that answer, because I'm going to come back to it. And I go on about some other things, and I come back and say, I asked you a question. I told you not to answer me. Do you know why? They usually don't know. The answer is very simple. I don't want to know. I was only being nice, right? I don't need you to tell me, you know what? It's pretty bad. I'm like, oh man, now I'm stuck with this.
Brings you down.
Right. I'm like, man, I ain't got time for your problem. I was just being nice and you weren't playing along with me, right? And so that's the problem, is that oftentimes we're cordial, but we're not interested.
Mm-hmm.
But being interested doesn't necessarily mean that I'm responsible.
Right.
If I see, Glenn or Randy, how's it going? I'm like, I'm having a really bad day. I'm like, oh, great. Now I got to fix that.
Yeah.
I don't have to fix that. I'm like, sorry, you're having a bad day, man.
Exactly. It don't make you a bad person.
Right. And it's just one of those, I understand. And maybe I might offer, personally, I would say, anything I can do to help. And then I'm like, oh, don't tell me. But he might. And it might be something that I can do. And you know what? I might be able to make somebody's day better.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes we're afraid of the answer. Oh, please don't tell me. And especially if, and again, more and more of this, right? So, as a result of loneliness or isolation or lost connections, we're more likely to be depressed. We're more likely to be hopeless. We're more likely to be desperate. Maybe we get into a really dark spot where, right, self-harm. Now we're there. And sometimes, and you know, you guys see them, sometimes you see that student and you're like, something going on.
Yeah.
Somebody need to ask. Who's going to ask? Not going to be me, because I don't want to inherit that problem. Who's here? Where's Frank? Call Frank. Frank out there. Frank. He looks sad. I don't know, man. You need to go talk to him. He don't need to be sad around me because he's going to make me feel bad, right? Because I don't want to get engaged. I don't want to get involved, because if I get involved, that's my problem, right? And I can tell myself 1,000 things as to why I don't need to do this. But many times it really just comes down to you just ask that question. How are you doing? All right. Not doing too good? You know, I got people for that, right? You know, let me at least offer you some resources or something like that. Or let me just say that, you know what, I'm sorry to hear that, right? Maybe it's not as pithy as, well, everything's going to be okay, right? Or you should pray more, or whatever else it is. That's really not an answer that sometimes we throw out there and try to tell people, like, but it'll be okay if you would only be a better Christian, or whatever else it is. I'm like, yeah, I don't need that, but I'm at least sympathetic. I at least heard you, right? I at least noticed you, because a lot of times as we fade away, as we begin to withdraw, we realize that nobody is paying attention. And that just escalates us down even further. It's like, all right. And nobody even noticed that I had on 2 different shoes today. But really, maybe everybody did and go, you got 2 different shoes? Where's my chair? Move over here, right? Because I heard the Unabomber did that. I don't know, or something else. I mean, we'll throw those types of thoughts in there, and that's where the problem is that we don't want to engage because we're afraid of what happens if we do, because now their problem somehow becomes ours, or somehow I become my brother's keeper immediately, and it's like, now I'm responsible for you, and I don't want to be, because I got enough things that I'm responsible for, and nobody's asked me. You know, nobody's coming to my rescue, so why should I be coming to yours? And so we go into this weird mental gymnastics of finding reasons not to make a connection, because ultimately we're afraid of what we're going to find out, whether we're going to be rejected or not, but we're afraid of the answer. We have to get over that, you know, first. And again, it's not that I'll as I walk the campus and, you know, I'll say hi. It's not like you have to say hi back. I'm just being nice. But at the same time, if something's happening, tell me, because I am here, right? I'm not going to pry it out of you, but if I happen to notice, you know, I know she haven't shaved in a month. What's going on there, right? Because it's not a real good look, you know, that type of thing, right? You know, I noticed you coming in later. Everything all right? Did you know we have some resources? And it's too easy to think that there aren't any, or that somebody else should be the one that solves this. But we're all in this together. And, you know, if my department's working fine, but another department isn't, then I can't work with that department. So how do I make that department work well? You know, we can't. My boss used to say, we work in silos. We do, right? This is my area, and you leave my area alone. Okay, but I've just put up walls to keep everybody out, and I keep myself from going out at the same time. So let's get rid of those walls and just say, all right, well, I'm here. We don't have to be friends. We don't have to go to movies together. We don't have to do anything else, but we are coworkers. And how you doing? And you know, even the same with classmates. Sometimes it's this awkwardness that I see sometimes, that they don't know how to communicate with one another, so they don't. And then we have misconceptions that take place over and over and over again. Like, okay, but if we went back to the beginning and realized that it was never what either side thought it was, right? You know, we got to reduce the tension here within this. But it never works that well. You know, it ends up being, well, she said this and he did that. This other, and then I just want to stay away from that one because I've heard some things. Okay, if that means anything, but you have to challenge that sometimes.
Therapy. Is therapy for everyone? And if not, who is it for?
Well, I mean, I'll definitely say that everyone can benefit from therapy. Does everyone need it? No. You know, a lot of times we do try to solve our own problems. And sometimes we are good at it, right? It's not that we are incapable of doing that. Sometimes we are aware, and then maybe we just need the right sign that says, right, I need to give up on this. I need to change that. Other times we need the benefit of someone else's point of view, right? What do you see? And not to be threatened by that, right? Because a lot of times we don't want to go, or we'll say a lot of times patients don't want to go to therapy because it's one of those, I don't want to be told that I'm wrong. And I'm so afraid of being told that I'm wrong, I will not go so that I don't have to hear it. And if I didn't have to hear it, then it can't be true. Still wrong. Still have difficulty with it. And so getting it out is really the key, right? We call it the weight. We carry lots of weights. And we have internal dialogues. We work a lot of things through in our heads sometimes. We work through conversations in our heads sometimes. But I'm sure you've had the same experience that I've had, that at some point it sounded really good. And then I said it out loud. Man,
Yeah.
how did that go so wrong?
Yeah.
2 seconds ago, it was perfect. It was everything. Well, we are convinced by our own echo. We hear it internally, and we get a different perspective of it. I really just need to get it out, because if I get it out, like, oh wait a minute, now it feels different, right? And I either feels, right, that was stupid, right? That was silly, right? Why am I holding on to this grudge, right?
Yeah.
But as long as it's inside, oh, it makes perfect sense. And so the real key to therapy is getting it out. If we can get it out, then we can kind of figure out what to do with it. It doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a solution. It just means that, okay, well, it's out. All right, now I have a better understanding of it. And maybe I can, with that better understanding, find better ways to deal with it, or better coping mechanisms. Avoidance is a two-edged sword, because sometimes it's necessary. We just need to avoid trouble. But then we can use avoidance to just avoid everything and call everything trouble. Like, no, but it makes perfect sense to say, well, don't walk across that beam, because you might fall down and die. All right, so I'm going to avoid walking on that beam, but now I'm avoiding everything. I can't avoid everything in my life.
Right.
No, we need to avoid trouble,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily just engage in avoidance behavior. And so we go back and forth, and being able to, at least in a therapeutic environment, being able to openly express that and just say, okay, well, let's let it breathe and figure out what we're doing with it, where it's not judgmental, where it's not, well, that was just stupid, so don't do that again, right? It's not, we're not trying to have a parental relationship. It's not necessarily about guidance. It's about, how do you feel about it? Let's talk about this. That's the value of therapy, is to get that out and to express it. And many times our complications with whatever the issues that we have are is because we've internalized them. It's getting them out. And so I think a lot of people can benefit from therapy. I think a lot of people are realizing that right now. There's, again, COVID is the big demarcation line, but post-COVID, the need for therapy has gone up, right? The number of people seeking out therapy has gone up for a variety of reasons, whether it's depression or anxiety, which are the most common ones, but there's a lot of trauma that's out there, and there's a lot of, we'll say, ghost issues that arise. You're like, I don't know how to deal with this. I need somebody to help me figure out how to deal with this, and that's the goal of it. And so we're seeing a sort of a great demand, and at the same time, there's not as big a supply as there used to be either. And so we're adapting in that field because, again, as I mentioned, before, we were very averse to the video stuff, right? I'm in a very complicated profession, because 40, 50 years ago, we were completely averse to medication, right? Therapy had nothing. Get the pills out of here. We're going to talk about better ways to deal with your problems, right? We're going to talk it all through. And today's, modern, we'll say, psychotherapy begins with medication first, right? And it makes sense from at least a perspective of, if I'm dealing with depression, or if I'm dealing with grief or loss or something, whatever it is. At the end of the day, if I had to categorize it, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. It does make sense to treat it biochemically on some level, whether it's an attention deficit disorder type of thing, or it's whatever it is. It's one of those, you just get the right chemistry going. I'm with you, but medication is more of an art form than it is an absolute science. So it doesn't doesn't work perfectly with everybody, and sometimes the dosage doesn't work just right, and the side effects just aren't it's like because we don't know enough to be able to say, oh well, it's just this, right? This isn't Star Trek. We go, well, it needs to be this, and then the replicator just makes it like, take this and it's going to fix everything, which would be great, and maybe we'll get there one day, but we're not there now. Now we're in all right, well, let's try this and see what that works. But then the opposite has happened, is that we started with medication, and then we just go, all right, well, we'll just go with that. Does that make you happy? Fantastic, you're good. All right, come back if it stops working. It's going to stop working the minute I stop taking pills. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we've abandoned the therapy side of things for the medication side of things, and it's that tug of war that we have to engage in and say, we probably need a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And if we just start relieving the pressure, we're going to get to the point where we can fix the problem. But we've got to get rid of that pressure first, because it just gets built up over time, and it gets convoluted, and sometimes it takes a while to pull those layers away and say, all right, well, these great walls were built up to defend us from ever having to experience this again. Great. Now I got to tear these walls down, and it's going to be hurtful and something else. And all right, well, what am I doing with it? So, I would say there are benefits, and we should be open to them, but then the patient should always be in control, right? It's about what's best for them. And sometimes I think that's what gets lost too, is that if you don't feel that you're making progress, not every therapist is the same. Sometimes it is a better connection with someone else. Sometimes it is it's a question of self-evaluating. Is this working for me or is it not? And if it's not, why and how do I fix that?
Yeah.
And if we're not encouraging that, then we'll never make progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. By the way, what time do you have to leave?
I don't know.
Can you
What
stay a
time
little
is
bit
it?
longer?
Yeah, I can keep going.
Okay, cool. I've been seeing a lot lately, because I look at a lot of different studies, and I should have had one in front of me. But right now it seems that like men are kind of losing. Maybe that's not the best word. Maybe we're not doing as well. Most men, I think men outnumber women in suicide. Men are, they're not seeking out education as much anymore, as opposed to women. I feel like more women are seeking out education. We see like even in like the Black community that like women are leading the charge, when it comes to entrepreneurship and different things of that nature. What are your thoughts on just like how men have kind of have fallen a little bit when it comes to education, when it comes to things that are just happening in the world? Yeah. I know that's a lot. That's a loaded question. But.
So it is. So first I'll go towards the sort of the suicide type thing. So we do study this over and over again, and we do tend to find the same things. Males are more successful at suicide than females, but I wouldn't say that males attempt suicide more, right? They're just more successful, right? They're more, all right, we're gonna do this. Here we go, right? And they're more likely to follow through with it. Females, study after study seems to indicate that while they will struggle with it and they will lead you there, they may not necessarily be doing it. They may just be the cry for help, right? They may be the flirtation with it, I guess is the best way to put that, where the male will be like, no, we're here, we're done, let's go. And there's a lot of gender reasons for that when it comes to gender roles. There's a lot of evolutionary evidence about that as well when it comes to certain types of tendencies. It's the nature more than anything else. And so I do think, when you go back to that same argument of nature versus nurture, which one is it? It's both. It's always both, right? And so there is a natural tendency to be a certain way, and then there is a nurturing environment that creates a certain situation that goes along with it. And I will say that on the societal side of things, right, the pressure on males is, don't let them see you sweat, don't let them see you cry. What are you doing, right? You're not strong. What are you, weak? You're out, right? Everybody got to be alpha. Not everybody can be an alpha. Somebody got to be a beta. But at some point, that's the pressure, right? I'm supposed to be. And I see that translated directly, and I see that translated indirectly through advertising or other channels, right? It's the impression that's being given. And so just recently, and as a tangent, not necessarily direct, but we're talking. I've been looking at supporting faculty and staff, right? How do we deal with students who are in distressed conditions, right? If they're expressing, they're acting out in class, or they're in an emotional state, or they're being disrupted, whatever else is. How do I deal with that? And so, there are, unsurprisingly, lots of studies and lots of books upon this, but all of them are old, right? Nothing is necessarily current. And then, you read some of them and you have to look at it and go, it seems harsh, right? It seems tough. And there was this one book I was looking at now, I can't even remember its name, but I remember, I read it and I'm like, there was just a feeling of it like, that doesn't seem like that would be the right approach today. And then I started reading basically, colleague responses to this book. And they're like, oh, this is horrible. Nobody would ever do this. This is terrible. Nobody should ever treat anybody this way. And I'm like, oh, there it is. That's what was missing, was that this book was it was written in 1980, and it was based on a study that was done in 1972. If you go back to that mindset, well, this makes perfect sense. That would be the approach that I would take in 1972. And as a matter of fact, you know what? We'd all be cool with that, because that's what we did in 1972 and 73 and 74, right? That's how we managed the classroom. This is how you would address a student who behaved in a certain way, but you wouldn't do that today, right? Things have changed. And so we have this, we put on the glasses and we go, oh, look at what they did yesterday. It's horrible, and I see that in the news as well. I don't know if you guys caught that. Apparently, Mary Poppins was just changed to PG, right, in Britain, right? So it's no longer G. It's no longer rated G. It's now rated PG because there's one word that now today we look at it and go, oh, can't use that word.
You know what the word is?
Hottentot. Serious, look it up. But anyway, it's just one of those. So now we're going back to Mary Poppins, universally accepted as a children's story. Like, Now it's parental guidance. Today, it's parental guidance. Now, it could be parental guidance for other things, because if I remember correctly, I think the penguins were smoking, right? And that was parental guidance alone. But of course, in the 60s, penguins smoking. Look at that. That's funny. Should it be changed to PG? No. But you have to put it in context. Say, okay, well, 1965, that was acceptable. Not acceptable today. We don't have that conversation. Instead, we'll look at it and go, well, that's just not acceptable now. But it was acceptable. And there are still some good things with that. So we get lost in those things sometimes. And I think the same thing is happening as we look at kind of what's going on in our communities, is that we have these pressures to behave a certain way, and they do change. And I will say, as much as, you kind of point out that, there are more women, either becoming entrepreneurs or taking action, right? But there's also,
which is a great thing. I'm not trying to say
no, it's a great thing, but you go back behind it and you find out that it's a train that's been coming, and there's a big push that's been coming towards that, right? And it starts decades ago, but it continues on. And so it's not necessarily a surprise as much as it's a continuation of a trend, but the reverse trend is happening in the male population, right? And so nobody's looked at that and said, oh, well, this has been happening. How do we change it? We would suddenly just recognize that, oh, well, this has happened. This is a problem. Now what are we going to do? We go back to the steps and say, okay, well, but why? What was the reason behind that? And then how do we change that conversation, right? Because it's never as simple as black and white. It's never as simple as it's just this. It's always shades of gray. It's always blurred, and it's always contextual, and you have to look at that context. There's a reason. And there was a historian, I forget his name now, but he used to always say that no single event occurs in a vacuum. Something precedes it, something comes after it. So as whatever we're looking at, it happened because of this. What was that? And at least maybe I can't change that, but I have a better understanding as to how did we get here? Because sometimes we just look at, how did this happen? It's been happening for a very long time.
The root of the problem.
And we're blind to it to a certain extent, or we've misjudged it, or we misunderstand it, or we haven't taken it seriously, whatever it was. Like, oh, now it's like, man, if I could just go back in time, I'd fix that. That may not happen, but what I have to be is more aware of, all right, well, what's happening right now, right? And that's where we lose that the idea is that we recognize that there's a problem, and then we don't necessarily recognize that in the present, I can take some action that will change that problem. That's what I really need to be doing, right? I can lament that this problem now occurs. All right, well, what am I doing different, right? And so what's my change, or what's my change of approach? Because if I recognize this is the problem, then my solution must be X. Are we doing X? And we're not. And that's the hardest part about all of this, is that a lot of times we are just pointing out this is the problem, and not necessarily, well, then this is a solution to that problem, or this is what we should try doing. Nope, we just go, another problem. Here we go. Another problem. I don't know what we're going to do. They're just bad. They just keep piling up. Maybe you should stay inside. Don't come outside, because there's nothing but problems out here. Over and over and over again, it just becomes repetitive in nature. I will say that there are, especially with respect to the discussion about suicide, there is definitely a greater awareness of it these days. And in particular, a greater awareness of the trauma-informed side of these issues, is that it's never just right now, right? It is going way back. Something has occurred over time, and it is built, right? And so there was an experience in childhood, there was an experience in early adolescence, there were multiple experiences, there's some factors, but all of this plays into, this is how we got here. Mm-hmm. And that is important, because it's never just, I can't believe you made this decision. No, in that person's mind, it's almost that they couldn't have come up with any other decision, because it's based on all this other stuff that's going on behind me. So I need to be aware of that to be able to bring it forward and say, all right, now what, right? Back to the present, right? We're here. Then what's the next step, right? What's the next change? How do I relieve the pressure? How do I ease the pain? How do I start to erode the walls, or whatever else, I want to look at it and say, all right, how do I deconstruct how we got here? I need to know that. But it's a step process and it's very active to do that as well, because that's what gets missed. We again live in a very instant society. We just want a quick answer. Whew.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm. Solved it. Roll the credits. Right.
Yeah.
And and again, never that simple.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have?
I just got one quick before we
go ahead.
wrap. Just one last quick question. From what you were saying, like I know there's no perfect guide for parental, right? You're a father, I'm a father. You don't have no kids. Do you think?
Yeah,
in your
you're
opinion,
out.
Do you think, in your opinion, psychologists make better parents?
No.
You don't think so?
No.
Why not? Because you can understand human behavior because you study, better than the regular person.
My wife used to say, "Don't shrink me."
Yeah, people do that.
And my kids pick up on that, and so I'm like,
Oh.
"So, hey, sweet pea, how you doing? Don't shrink me, Dad."
Mm-hmm.
All right. The danger of those with psychology backgrounds being parents is that we now try to apply and experiment
Right.
with the kids, and that doesn't do any good, right? That's not going to be of help. But it's no different, and I'll say so. I'll say that both of my kids they like to achieve things, right? So they do things. My son likes to play hockey, and so we get involved in a lot of events, and I see other parents, sporting parents, and especially in the world of hockey, oftentimes we run into parents, fathers who were hockey players, right? And they were semi-pro or whatever it is, and you see this in other sports as well, but it is that idea of vicarious living, right? Oh, you got to work harder. You're not going to make it to the next level. Mm-hmm. Maybe we're not going for the next level. Maybe we just need to be worried about this level, right? And not necessarily worrying about the next level at this moment. But too many times that pressure goes on that kids. It's not just a sport thing. It's an entertainment thing. It's a career thing, right? I was this. You can be that too. And I will say that my daughter is at that age where they're going through the graduation plans at high school. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm a big stop having that conversation, because I do think that too many times, at least right now in the high school level, they're putting too much pressure on these kids in high school to figure out their lives. I didn't know what I was doing at 16, 17 years old. What makes me think that today they know what they're doing? And that this isn't a good, at the same time, it's not like, well, just do whatever you want and you'll get through life. No, you need to be thinking, but you don't need to be making committed decisions. The kids want to do, ultimately, they will say the majority of them still want to make their parents proud. They want to make their parents happy. And so we were in a graduation meeting and my daughter said, well, I think I might want to go after psychology. And I'm like, whoa, flag on the play here. What brings this on, right? We haven't had that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be like me, right? Don't be me. And I can understand that maybe she has an interest in it, but at the same time, I also don't necessarily trust that interest as much as it might be, well, I just want to make sure that my parents are happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I may be doing this for them. And we get into this dangerous spot where they don't necessarily have control of their lives. It's hard at that age to be able to make all the right decisions or to be able to mentally process all of the things that you need to process. And inevitably, both of my kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to misjudge something, and that's okay, right? Tell them it's all right to fail. It's just not all right to quit. You got to keep going. But you have to think it through,
Mm-hmm.
and don't do anything to make me happy. What's going to make me happy is if they're successful, and I tell them that. And I think that message gets lost sometimes on kids. I definitely want them to be successful, and I definitely am more fearful of what they're going to face. I as I told my wife, I grew up in the Bronx. I walked 6 blocks down, 2 blocks over to go to school every morning. We didn't have cars, and Bronx in the 70s wasn't a safe place, but my parents were either very smart or very lucky to allow me at the same age my kids are now to walk the streets.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let my kids walk the streets in Charleston. Not that I think that Charleston's much worse, but it's creepy at some points. And there are things I just don't know. And we live in a very global age. I'm like, I don't know any of this. And so I told my wife, we have to focus on, they're going to face a world that I couldn't have imagined. Right? I didn't have social media. I didn't have to worry about cyberbullying. We didn't have, online video game communities. We didn't have digital classes. We didn't have any of this nonsense. Music, what? No, get the 45 from the record store. We play that needle out.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we was doing, right? And I don't even want to talk about the 8-track player.
Oh.
But
You don't know nothing.
it was a different world that I had to experience. I don't really know what to expect. And what I know is important is that they need to trust me.
Yeah.
And I need to trust them, because when they face that situation where I don't know how to answer this question, I'm going to hope that they're going to come to me and I can help them solve it. Or if there's somewhere that they can hear my voice, work through, how do I solve this problem?
Yeah.
Right? I want them to be in that mindset as opposed to anything else. And I will say that I would just distrust anybody, parents and who with any background in psychology to not want to force some things, and it's a danger, and I see this, I see this as I deal with some parents right now. We have dual credit students, and there's an old saying that what we need to do is prepare the child, not the path. And there are too many times that I see parents trying to clear the pathway for their kids. Like, so there's no obstacles, so they're not going to struggle. They're going to be successful all the way through it. They're right ahead of them, trying to make sure that everything works the way. And I get that. No parent is, I tell the parents, you may not outlive them. What are you going to do? What are they going to do when you're gone?
Right.
How are they going to solve the problems? How are they going to take care of themselves? And there's usually not an answer to that question, right? Because they're like, well, that's just never going to happen. Like, yeah, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
What's realistic is they're going to need to stumble. They're going to need to fall. They're going to need to fail. They're going to need to figure out, right?
So they learn.
What is it that I need to do, right? And all the sports platitudes, right? If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Yeah.
Let's go, right?
Yeah.
That's the process to try to figure these things out. And I wish there was more of that took place. my experience is we don't see as much of that, right?
Yeah.
What we see is the control level of I want you to be successful, and I can't trust you to be successful, so I'm going to be successful for you. Watch me do all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I've served no good
Right.
doing that.
Right.
And sometimes we see these. I know that he's had some teammates over the years. My son's had some teammates who just get burned out. I'm like, yep, I'm done with this. I can't deal with this pressure anymore.
Yeah.
And I've seen that with some of my daughter's friends as well. Is that I give up. I can't do that anymore. And it's hard, and especially in an age where. Right. I drive off this campus and there's going to be 9 digital billboards that are going to be telling me everything that I need to know today about what it is I'm supposed to be buying before I can get home. And some of them are going to be very engaging, and some of them are going to be, why is I'm seeing this thing again? Right. Yeah. type of thing. And
so you think because your career, it helps make you be a little bit more sympathetic as a parent because of your career?
I'll say yes. And at the same time, I'll fall back more on, as I grew up, what did my parents do? What were their choices? What did I learn from others? Yeah. Right? There are examples that I've seen in my life of, right, that it wasn't handled correctly. Let me make a note of that. Don't do this when this happens. Right. Yeah. And so I'd say I have probably better training of that than I do necessarily anything academic.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't mean that I don't recognize the signs. The challenge is, and sometimes my wife's like, well, do you think do you think that she has ADHD? I'm like, oh, and I would know. Wait, would I? Let me think about this. Yeah. Right? Because am I being objective or am I biased? Right? Do you not have it because I say you don't have it? And what would it matter if you actually do? All right, let's talk this through. And then sometimes I'll just jump down the rabbit hole on that, and it's like, okay, but then back to basics. What's the problem in front of us? And did we solve that problem? And can we move on? Because whether I label it or name it or whatever else it is, it still exists.
Right.
And what are we doing about that? And, my goal is just with respect to my kids, I want them to be healthy and happy. Okay, well, can I check those boxes? As long as I can check those boxes, I don't really care how I got there.
That's every parent. Yep, absolutely.
Well, Frank, this has been a really great podcast.
Okay.
I love just, letting people go. And you're one of those people that you can just let go, just let you go and talk about things. And so, we covered a lot.
Well, see, I get paid to listen, but, that lets it build up. And then it's all got to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
Release that energy.
That's it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on with us.
Sure.
And,
appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll try to get you back on if you're okay with it.
When and where. That's all I need to know.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Well, this is the Black Summit. I'm Brooks.
And I'm Hendrix.
And thank you again for joining us.